The most dangerous worlds are never the ones that roar. They're the ones that stay silent until you teach them your name. Ethan Carter kept reading long after everyone else had closed the file. The conference chamber floated above the blue curve of Earth in perfect artificial gravity, its crystal walls reflecting thousands of stars that looked peaceful from a safe distance. Soft white lights shimmered across the circular table where representatives from 12 civilizations gathered for what should have been another routine planetary classification review. Steam drifted from untouched cups of coffee beside Ethan's tablet, while alien delegates scrolled through reports with effortless confidence. Hundreds of worlds had been categorized during the past decade. Another one would take less than 10 minutes. That was the expectation. Planet KX 991 appeared almost disappointingly ordinary. Moderate gravity, oxygen-rich atmosphere, stable temperatures ranging between 48 and 74 degrees Fahrenheit across the primary survey zones. No apex predators larger than a mountain lion. No toxic oceans. No violent tectonic instability. Satellite imagery displayed endless emerald forests divided by silver rivers that reflected twin suns like polished mirrors. The preliminary recommendation glowed across every display. Deathworld-Adjacent. Low operational concern. Approved for civilian research. Around the table, signatures began appearing one after another. Commander Lyra Voss barely looked up from her screen before adding her authorization. Her white skin carried a faint pearlescent glow beneath the conference lighting, and her calm gray eyes reflected years of disciplined command. To her, the report represented another predictable assignment waiting for another efficient crew. "Anything to add, Mr. Carter?" the chairman asked without much interest. Ethan did not answer immediately. He reached page 8. Nobody else had. Hidden beneath layers of ecological summaries and statistical models rested a forgotten appendix written nearly 100 years earlier by a survey team that had vanished from official discussion. The warning was not dramatic. It contained no desperate language, no flashing symbols, only one sentence highlighted in faded archival formatting. Do not evaluate this ecosystem by individual threats. Evaluate it by relationships. Ethan leaned back slowly. His fingers tapped once against the tablet. Around him, conversations had already shifted toward lunch schedules and transportation logistics. Someone quietly laughed across the room. Another delegate requested approval for the next agenda item. The silence surrounding page 8 disturbed him more than any emergency alarm ever had. "I object," Ethan finally said. The room stopped just long enough to acknowledge that a human had interrupted procedure. Commander Lyra raised one elegant eyebrow. "On what grounds?" she asked. Ethan enlarged the forgotten appendix onto the central display. Ancient survey notes appeared across the chamber wall, their formatting noticeably older than the polished modern interface surrounding them. Several delegates frowned. Most seemed impatient. "Because somebody already tried to tell us something," Ethan replied, "and none of us bothered to read it." The chairman folded four slender hands together. These notes were archived after improved orbital mapping. Their conclusions were considered incomplete. Ethan nodded once. "Maybe, but incomplete does not mean wrong." Lyra studied the projection for several seconds before speaking. "You believe one outdated observation outweighs decades of modern analysis?" "No, es incercable. I believe experience deserves 5 minutes before we risk 500 lives." A few delegates exchanged amused glances. Humans had earned a reputation throughout the Galactic Union for carrying excessive survival equipment, preparing backup plans for backup plans, and imagining disasters that never happened. Their caution was often described as evolutionary anxiety inherited from a chaotic homeworld. Ethan had heard every version of the joke. Usually he laughed with everyone else. Today he did not smile. "The environmental models show remarkable stability," Lyra continued. "Every measurable indicator supports the current classification." Ethan looked toward the enormous window where Earth rotated beneath them. From orbit, hurricanes looked beautiful. Wildfire smoke resembled delicate watercolor strokes. Oceans concealed storms capable of swallowing cities without warning. Distance had a way of making danger appear elegant. Nature does not promise safety because it looks organized, he said quietly. Sometimes perfect balance is exactly what makes it dangerous. The chairman exhaled with visible impatience. Your recommendation? Ethan closed the file, but not before memorizing every line of the forgotten appendix. Delay civilian clearance. Send a multidisciplinary observation team. Read every archived note before anyone steps onto that planet. A brief silence followed. Then the voting resumed. Green approval lights illuminated the chamber one after another. Ethan watched them spread around the table like falling dominoes. Only one light remained amber. His own. The final decision echoed softly through the room. Classification confirmed. Mission authorized. Archive, note acknowledged. No further action required. Commander Lyra gathered her tablet and paused beside Ethan as the delegates departed. You truly believe a single overlooked sentence matters that much? She asked. Ethan looked once more at the closed file resting beneath his hand. The warnings that save lives, he answered, are almost never the ones people remember. They're the ones people assume someone else already read. The shuttle Meridian descended through pale silver clouds with barely a whisper, its reinforced hull gliding across layers of calm atmosphere that looked almost unreal beneath the morning light. Ethan Carter stood behind the cockpit crew with his arms folded, quietly watching every number flowing across the environmental displays. Oxygen levels remained ideal. Atmospheric pressure rested comfortably within Earth standards. Radiation barely exceeded natural background levels. Wind measured only 6 miles per hour. Every instrument repeated the same conclusion. Safe. Commander Lyra Voss noticed him studying the terrain instead of the data. She stepped beside him, her polished exploration uniform catching soft reflections from the navigation screens. Her white skin seemed almost luminous beneath the cool cockpit lights, while her composed gray eyes never left the expanding landscape below. Your expression tells a different story than the instruments, she said. Ethan offered a faint smile without looking away. The instruments are measuring the planet. I am watching the behavior. Lyra folded her hands behind her back. Behavior? Nothing moves. She looked through the forward canopy again. Endless forests stretched across rolling hills like carefully arranged green velvet. Crystal rivers wound between enormous stone cliffs. White flowers covered broad meadows without interruption. Birds drifted peacefully through the bright sky in graceful circles. It resembled every promotional image created for luxury colony advertisements. I see wildlife everywhere, Lyra answered. Ethan slowly shook his head. Exactly. But listen. The cockpit became quiet. Even the pilots instinctively stopped speaking. Only the gentle vibration of the engines filled the air. Outside, thousands of living creatures occupied the valley below. Yet almost no natural sound reached the shuttle. No layered chorus of insects. No competing animal calls. No chaotic background noise that normally existed inside healthy ecosystems. Everything appeared coordinated. Too coordinated. The Meridian settled onto a wide plateau overlooking a freshwater lake so transparent that smooth stones were visible nearly 30 feet below the surface. Hydraulic supports extended with soft metallic clicks before the landing engines powered down completely. Warm sunlight spilled across the landing site. Fresh air entered through the opening ramp, carrying the clean scent of pine, damp earth, and blooming vegetation. Several members of the survey team smiled immediately. One scientist stretched both arms overhead and laughed quietly. This place feels like a vacation world. Another technician knelt beside unfamiliar blue grass, already collecting samples before the equipment cases had even been unloaded. Portable scanners projected reassuring green indicators across nearly every environmental category. Commander Lyra watched the efficient deployment with visible satisfaction. It appears your concerns may have been unnecessary after all. Ethan crouched beside the shuttle ramp instead of answering. His fingers brushed the ground. The soil felt unusually firm despite recent satellite images showing rainfall only 12 hours earlier. He lifted a handful of dark earth. Moisture content matched the reports exactly. Texture did not. Tiny root fibers formed intricate networks unlike anything he had studied on Earth. They seemed almost woven together. He released the soil slowly. Interesting, he whispered. A nearby botanist overheard him. Already discovering something? Ethan nodded toward the roots. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The botanist laughed politely before returning to cataloging flowers. Across the clearing, several small, grazing animals lifted their heads simultaneously. They remained perfectly still for 3 full seconds before lowering their heads at exactly the same moment. Ethan watched without blinking. Lyra followed his gaze. Coincidence? She asked. Perhaps. He adjusted the small environmental recorder attached to his belt. But coincidences become patterns if you collect enough of them. The survey camp expanded steadily throughout the afternoon. Solar arrays unfolded beneath the sunlight. Communication towers rose into position. Autonomous drones mapped surrounding terrain with flawless precision. Every report arriving at the command station carried the same reassuring phrase. No anomalies detected. Ethan submitted none. Instead, he filled his notebook with observations that no sensor considered important. Bird flocks changing direction without visible signals. Flowers closing several minutes before passing clouds cover the sun. Fish disappearing beneath the lake's surface precisely before drones crossed overhead. Individually meaningless. Together unsettling. As evening approached, golden light spilled across the valley, transforming the forests into fields of amber and emerald. Several researchers gathered outside the command shelter, admiring what many already called the most beautiful world they had ever visited. Commander Lyra stood beside Ethan holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to him without speaking. For several minutes, they watched the peaceful landscape in silence. Finally, she asked, "If you were forced to ignore every instrument we brought, what would your instincts tell you?" Ethan accepted the warm cup, but never took his eyes from the distant tree line. The forest looked perfectly still, almost as though it were waiting. "My instincts," he answered quietly, "are telling me this planet noticed we arrived long before we noticed it." Ironically, the first thing that made Ethan Carter uneasy was not something anyone saw. It was something everyone stopped hearing. Dawn arrived beneath a blanket of pale blue mist that drifted across the valley like slow-moving water. Tiny droplets gathered on every blade of grass, reflecting the first rays of sunlight until the entire landscape shimmered like polished glass. Camp Meridian awakened with quiet efficiency. Portable générateur humide steadily. Coffee brewed inside the mobile galley. Scientists reviewed overnight sensor logs, while survey drones lifted into the cool morning air one after another. Every automated report delivered the same reassuring conclusion. Environmental stability remained exceptional. Air quality remained ideal. Wildlife activity remained normal. Commander Lyra Voss studied the incoming data with visible satisfaction. 20 consecutive hours without a single operational concern, she announced to the assembled team. We are ahead of schedule. Several researchers applauded softly before returning to their assignments. Ethan stood outside the command shelter with a steaming metal cup warming his hands. His attention never settled on the monitors. Instead, he watched a line of small silver birds resting along the edge of the lake. They had not moved for nearly 10 minutes. Suddenly, every bird launched into the air at exactly the same instant. No warning call. No visible predator. No hosetastion. Hundreds of wings lifted together with perfect precision before disappearing into the eastern forest. Ethan quietly checked the time. 7:38 in the morning. 30 seconds later, a gentle breeze crossed the lake and reached the camp. It carried the scent of damp cedar mixed with unfamiliar flowers. Researchers barely noticed the change. Ethan did. He opened his field notebook and wrote another observation. Wildlife movement precedes environmental shift by approximately 30 seconds. Pattern repeated. Nearby, Dr. Samuel Brooks knelt beside a cluster of bright violet plants growing around a smooth stone. The flowers emitted a faint golden glow beneath direct sunlight. "Beautiful little things," he said with a grin. "Imagine what these could mean for medical research." Ethan walked toward him. "Have you already scanned the root system?" Samuel nodded confidently. "Completely harmless." Ethan looked at the surrounding ground. "Then why is nothing else growing within 6 feet? Samuel paused. His smile faded slightly as he glanced around the clearing. Ethan was correct. The glowing flowers occupied a perfectly circular patch of earth untouched by grass, moss, or shrubs. "Probably chemical competition," Samuel replied after a moment. "Many earth plants do the same thing." "Probably," Ethan answered. He did not sound convinced. By midday, the expedition expanded beyond the original landing zone. Mapping teams divided into smaller groups, each following carefully planned survey routes. Commander Lyra authorized a shallow water sampling mission at the nearby lake, while engineers installed additional communication relays across the plateau. Everything unfolded exactly according to protocol. At 12:16 in the afternoon, a maintenance technician accidentally dropped a compact equipment case while unloading supplies beside the shoreline. The metal container struck a flat stone with a sharp metallic crack before sliding harmlessly into the grass. Several people looked up briefly before returning to work. Ethan did not. His eyes moved immediately toward the lake. Tiny ripples spread across the perfectly still water, although nothing had touched its surface. One ripple became 3. 3 became dozens. Then every fish beneath the transparent water vanished simultaneously into deeper shadows. The shoreline became strangely empty. Ethan turned slowly toward the surrounding forest. The breeze stopped. Leaves that had danced gently all morning became completely motionless. Even the insects disappeared. No vasing, no chirping, no distant calls. The silence arrived all at once, as though an invisible conductor had lowered a baton across the entire valley. Ethan's heartbeat remained steady, but every instinct developed from a lifetime on Earth tightened inside him. He walked directly toward Commander Lyra without raising his voice. "We need to suspend all field activity." She looked up from her tablet. "Reason? The environment just changed." She glanced around. Warm sunlight still covered the valley. The sky remained perfectly clear. Researchers continued laughing near the lake. "I do not see any change." Ethan answered calmly. "Exactly. That is the problem." Several officers gathered as he continued. The birds left before the wind arrived. The fish disappeared after one dropped tool. The insects stopped making noise at the same moment. Every species is reacting together. One officer shrugged politely. Perhaps they are responding to natural cycles. Ethan met his eyes. Natural cycles rarely synchronize across unrelated species within seconds. Lyra remained thoughtful, but unconvinced. "Do you recommend full evacuation?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. Immediately, silence settled over the command circle. Finally, Lyra looked toward the peaceful valley stretching beneath the afternoon sun. Nothing appeared threatening. Every instrument continued displaying green status indicators. Every camera showed a paradise untouched by danger. She slowly lowered her tablet. "I cannot authorize an evacuation based entirely on instinct." Ethan accepted the answer without argument. He simply looked once more toward the silent forest beyond the lake. Somewhere beyond those trees, something had changed. The sensors had measured nothing. The wildlife had noticed everything. The change began so quietly that the first person to notice it was not a scientist. It was the camp cook. She stood outside the mobile kitchen, holding a tray of fresh bread when she frowned toward the forest. "Does anyone else smell rain?" she asked. Several heads turned instinctively toward the bright afternoon sky. Not a single cloud floated above the valley. Warm sunlight still covered every hill in soft golden light. The weather station immediately confirmed zero chance of precipitation. Someone laughed and blamed the unfamiliar plants. Ethan Carter did not laugh. He walked toward the nearest weather sensor and studied the live readings. Air pressure had dropped less than 1%. Temperature remained unchanged at 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity climbed only slightly. None of those changes justified the scent, now drifting through the camp. It smelled exactly like the air before a summer storm back on Earth. Fresh, metallic, waiting. Commander Lyra Voss stepped beside him. "Your instruments agree with ours," she said calmly. "Everything remains within expected parameters." Ethan nodded slowly. "That is what worries me." Before she could answer, one of the aerial survey drones transmitted a routine landscape update. The projection expanded above the portable command table, displaying the surrounding valley in remarkable detail. At first glance, nothing appeared different. Then Ethan noticed it. "Pause the image." The operator obeyed. Ethan pointed toward the eastern forest where millions of tree crowns formed an endless green ocean. "Zoom in there." The magnified image revealed hundreds of leaves turning in the exact same direction. Another zoom showed thousands more doing the same thing. Then tens of thousands. Not because of wind. The surrounding grass remained perfectly still. Every tree had rotated its leaves toward a single invisible point somewhere beyond the mountains. "Can plants do that?" one engineer whispered. A botanist adjusted her glasses before speaking. "Some species follow sunlight throughout the day, but never this quickly. And certainly not every species together." Ethan quietly closed the projection. "The network is responding." Several researchers exchanged confused looks. "Network?" Ethan knelt beside the nearest patch of bluegrass and carefully brushed aside the surface layer. Fine white roots stretched beneath the soil like delicate threads woven into an enormous living fabric. Every few inches, another root connected to another, then another. The pattern continued beyond the edge of visibility. "We kept studying individual organisms," Ethan said softly. "We never asked what happens if the entire ecosystem behaves like one organism." No one answered immediately. A distant vibration rolled beneath everyone's boots. It was so gentle that several people assumed a shuttle engine had started. The parked meridian remained silent. Then the lake changed. Crystal clear water clouded almost instantly as billions of microscopic particles rose from the depths together. Fish that had hidden earlier remained completely absent. The smooth surface reflected the afternoon sun with an unusual silver shimmer that had not existed minutes before. Portable water monitors began producing soft, alert tones. One after another. Not emergency alarms. Advisory notifications. Water chemistry changing. Oxygen concentration decreasing slightly. Mineral composition shifting. That should not happen this fast, Dr. Samuel Brooks said while checking 3 different displays. Natural changes require hours. Ethan looked toward the silent forest. Unless something told everything to change at once. The vibration beneath the ground returned. Slightly stronger this time. Solar panels automatically adjusted their angle without receiving any command from the camp computers. Nearby flowers folded their glowing petals, closed although sunlight still flooded the valley. Even the gentle breeze disappeared again. Every movement across the landscape seemed to pause between one heartbeat and the next. Commander Lyra finally activated her communicator. "All survey teams, report your status immediately." Responses arrived within seconds. Team Alpha reported unusual changes in soil composition. Team Beta observed entire insect colonies disappearing underground. Team Gamma detected sudden shifts in local magnetic fields without any geological explanation. None of the reports described danger. Yet every report described change. Simultaneous change. Ethan opened his notebook to the page containing the forgotten archival warning. His thumb rested beneath a single handwritten sentence copied from the century-old appendix. Evaluate relationships, not threats. He looked up just as another notification appeared across every environmental display in the command center. Atmosphere pollen concentration had increased by 400% within less than 3 minutes. Nobody had seen a single flower release it. Nobody had recorded any significant wind. Commander Lyra slowly lowered her tablet. For the first time since arriving, certainty disappeared from her face. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "if this is one connected system—" Ethan finished the thought without taking his eyes off the valley. Then somebody did not disturb one plant. He watched the silver shimmer spread farther across the lake, while every forest remained impossibly still beneath the afternoon sun. Somebody just touched the entire planet. Commander Lyra Voss did not waste another second. "All field teams, return to the central camp immediately," she ordered through the communication network. Her calm voice remained steady, but every experienced explorer recognized the subtle change in its tone. This was no longer a routine precaution. Around the valley, confirmation signals appeared one after another as researchers packed portable laboratories, sealed specimen containers, and redirected autonomous drones toward the landing site. Ethan Carter remained standing beside the command table, watching the surrounding landscape instead of the returning teams. He was not looking for danger. He was looking for patterns. Every lesson he had learned growing up on Earth repeated itself inside his mind. Wildfires did not begin with flames. Floods did not begin with rushing water. Avalanches did not begin with falling snow. Nature always whispered before it spoke loudly. Most people simply never learned how to listen. Another gentle vibration rolled beneath the plateau. This time the movement lasted only 2 seconds before fading into silence. Coffee inside metal mugs formed tiny, circular ripples. Hanging utility lights swayed almost imperceptibly. Several researchers instinctively looked toward the distant mountains, expecting an earthquake warning. The geological monitors remained green. No seismic activity detected. One technician reported with obvious confusion. Ethan quietly nodded. "Because the ground is not breaking. Something underneath, it is communicating." Nobody laughed this time. Commander Lyra turned toward the environmental display. "Can we identify the source?" 3 specialists compared readings from independent sensor arrays before answering together. "Negative. Every instrument detects the effect. None of them identify the cause." Ethan looked across the valley, where the silver shimmer continued spreading through the lake. "Then stop asking what it is," he said. "Start asking why everything else is responding to it." His words redirected the entire discussion. Instead of studying one strange phenomenon, the scientists began comparing dozens of unrelated observations collected since landing. The results appeared almost unbelievable. Bird migration had changed exactly 4 minutes before atmospheric pollen increased. Aquatic microorganisms altered their behavior 2 minutes before mineral concentrations shifted. Flower petals closed 1 minute before magnetic fluctuations appeared. Underground root activity increased before every environmental change. None of the events caused the others directly. Yet every event happened in sequence, like carefully arranged notes inside a symphony. Dr. Samuel Brooks stared at the growing timeline projected above the command console. "This is impossible," he whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, it is organized." Samuel slowly looked toward him. "You already suspected something like this, did not you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Back home, forests sometimes warn each other about insects by releasing chemicals into the air. Trees share nutrients through underground fungal networks. Fish respond to pressure changes before storms arrive. Ants rebuild colonies before humans notice approaching floods. Earth taught us one important lesson." He paused while watching another flock of silver birds circle high above the forest without landing. "Life survives longer when it cooperates." Commander Lyra studied the projected timeline again. "You believe this entire planet functions as one enormous cooperative system. I believe every living thing here exchanges information faster than our instruments can measure." Before anyone could respond, a soft alert chimed across every portable tablet in camp. Energy consumption from the communication towers had increased by 20% without any additional transmissions. Engineers immediately checked the equipment. Every system operated perfectly. No faults, no overlookings. Ethan walked outside the command shelter. The afternoon sunlight remained warm against his face, but the valley no longer felt welcoming. It felt attentive. Across the meadow, thousands of blue grass blades leaned gently toward the camp, although no wind moved across the plateau. The movement happened so slowly that it resembled flowers turning toward sunlight. Except the sun stood behind them. He crouched carefully without touching the plants. "You are watching us too," he murmured. Commander Lyra approached quietly. "Who?" Ethan extended one finger toward the endless meadow. "Not an animal, not a predator. The ecosystem." She remained silent beside him. Together they watched as another subtle wave passed through the grassland. It moved without sound, flowing from the distant forest toward the lake before disappearing beneath the soil beneath their feet. It looked less like wind and more like a thought traveling through living tissue. For the first time in her distinguished career, Lyra realized she had prepared her expedition to face dangerous creatures, unstable weather, and unknown diseases. She had prepared for every threat she could imagine. She had never prepared to meet an entire planet capable of behaving like a single living intelligence. Ethan slowly stood and looked toward the parked Meridian. "We should leave before we force the next response." Lyra did not argue. She opened the fleet communication channel immediately. "All personnel," she announced with quiet authority, "accelerate shutdown procedures. We are moving the departure schedule forward." Almost everyone obeyed without hesitation. Almost everyone. One survey drone, operating nearly 2 miles beyond the eastern ridge, continued transmitting uninterrupted. Its pilot had not yet received the updated order because the communication signal briefly weakened. Ethan noticed the missing return marker on the tactical display before anyone else did. His expression changed instantly. He looked toward the silent eastern forest where the drone still hovered alone. "Commander," he said quietly, "I do not think the planet is finished answering us yet." Ironically, the breakthrough came from the only machine that stopped behaving like a machine. The survey drone hanging above the eastern ridge suddenly abandoned its programmed flight pattern. Inside the command shelter, a soft notification chimed across every console. "Navigation override detected. Automatic stabilization engaged." Commander Lyra Voss immediately stepped toward the communication station. "Reconnect manual control," she ordered. The drone pilot worked rapidly across multiple holographic panels. "I am trying." The controls respond, but the drone keeps correcting every command. Ethan Carter walked beside the display without speaking. The live camera feed remained crystal clear. The drone floated 30 feet above a narrow clearing surrounded by towering white trees whose smooth trunks reflected the fading afternoon light. Nothing appeared unusual. No moving creatures. No storms. No damaged equipment. Yet the aircraft refused to leave. "Zoom out," Ethan said quietly. The operator expanded the image until the surrounding terrain filled the display. Several officers leaned closer. At first they saw only forest. Then someone inhaled sharply. Every tree within nearly half a mile leaned inward almost imperceptibly. Not toward the sun, not toward the wind, toward the drone. The pattern formed a perfect circle. "That cannot be natural," whispered Dr. Samuel Brooks. Ethan answered without taking his eyes from the screen. "Nothing here is behaving randomly." Another alert appeared. Drone battery consumption increasing. Communication latency increasing. Environmental signal interference increasing. None of the values reached dangerous levels. Individually, every warning looked insignificant. Together, they formed another sequence. Ethan recognized it immediately. "Do not force the controls," he said. The pilot looked up in confusion. "If I stop correcting, we lose the drone." Ethan nodded once. "If you keep fighting it, we may lose something much more important." Commander Lyra studied him carefully. "Explain." Ethan enlarged the environmental timeline that had been growing since their arrival. Every unusual event followed the same principle. A small disturbance, a coordinated response, a larger adjustment, never immediate, never chaotic. Every reaction remained proportional. "We assumed the planet was attacking," Ethan said calmly. But what if it has been doing something else the entire time? Samuel frowned. Such as? Ethan pointed toward the hovering drone. Maintaining balance. Silence settled across the shelter. Outside, the evening breeze finally returned, carrying the familiar scent of cedar and damp soil through the open doorway. It no longer smelled threatening. It smelled measured, controlled. Ethan continued. Think about Earth's immune system. When one foreign object enters the body, every response is carefully scaled. Not to destroy everything, to restore equilibrium. Commander Lyra slowly lowered her tablet. You believe this ecosystem treats us like foreign cells. Not enemies, Ethan corrected gently. Variables. At that exact moment, the drone camera captured something no one expected. The ground beneath the aircraft shimmered faintly. Tiny white roots emerged through the soil, not breaking the surface completely, but weaving together just beneath the thin layer of earth. Thousands of delicate strands connected with astonishing precision, forming intricate patterns that expanded outward like ripples across water. They never touched the drone. They simply surrounded the space beneath it. Dr. Brooks enlarged the biological scan. The root systems are exchanging electrical signals. Another scientist overlaid magnetic field data. The patterns matched perfectly. Ethan smiled for the first time since landing. There it is. Commander Lyra looked toward him. What? The communication network. Nobody spoke as fresh information streamed across the monitors. The electrical pulses traveled through roots, transferred into underground fungal structures, reached nearby water channels, then spread toward distant forests with remarkable efficiency. Every living system participated. Plants, microorganisms, water, soil. Even atmospheric pollen shifted according to the same invisible rhythm. The planet was not reacting through millions of independent organisms. It was processing information through one living network. No wonder our instruments never found a central intelligence, Samuel whispered. There is not one. Ethan nodded. Because every living thing shares the work. Commander Lyra looked toward the silent valley outside the shelter, where golden sunlight faded into the first colors of evening. How did humanity learn to recognize something like this so quickly? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because Earth never allowed us to believe survival belonged to the strongest creature. He watched another flock of silver birds settle peacefully along the distant shoreline. It belonged to the species that learned how everything connects. The communications officer suddenly looked up from his station. Commander. Lyra turned immediately. Report. The officer pointed toward the drone display with visible disbelief. Without receiving a single control command, the survey drone slowly rotated away from the center of the clearing. It accelerated gently before flying back toward camp along the safest possible route. No alarm sounded. No systems failed. It simply returned. Ethan watched the tiny aircraft growing larger against the orange evening sky. His quiet voice carried through the shelter. It just made a decision. No one corrected him, because for the first time since arriving, every person inside the command center realized they were no longer studying a beautiful planet. They were standing inside a conversation that had been taking place long before they ever arrived. Ironically, the oldest discovery on the planet was waiting exactly where no one had planned to search. Night settled gently across the valley as Camp Meridian completed its accelerated departure preparations. Portable laboratories folded into transport containers. Communication towers lowered section by section. Engineers secured power cells while the soft glow of work lights replaced the fading sunlight. No one spoke as loudly as they had that morning. Every movement carried a new sense of respect. Not fear, awareness. Ethan Carter stood beside the recovered survey drone while its memory banks synchronized with the command network. Thousands of environmental recordings flowed across the main display. Most contained ordinary landscape imagery. Then one navigation log caught his attention. The drone had briefly scanned beneath the forest canopy before losing manual control. "Stop there," Ethan said. The operator froze the frame. Hidden beneath overlapping branches stood a structure that did not belong to the natural landscape. Smooth white stone rose from the earth in perfect geometric lines, almost completely covered by moss and flowering vines. It was neither large nor imposing. It looked forgotten. Commander Lyra Voss stepped closer. Why did orbital satellites never detect that? A mapping specialist enlarged the image. The tree canopy continuously shifts above it. Every overhead pass was blocked by vegetation. Ethan smiled faintly. Or protected by it. Silence followed. The forgotten appendix returned to his thoughts. Someone had tried to leave a warning. Someone had failed. Perhaps they had also left something more. Lyra looked toward the dark forest visible beyond the edge of camp. How far? Just under 1 mile, the operator answered. She considered the distance only briefly. We leave in 2 hours. Ethan met her eyes. Neither of them needed to explain the decision. 10 minutes later, they walked together beneath towering white trees, illuminated by portable lanterns that cast warm circles across the forest floor. They brought no weapons beyond standard emergency equipment. Ethan had insisted on that before leaving camp. If this world has treated every disturbance as information, he explained while adjusting his backpack, then the last thing we should communicate is aggression. Lyra accepted his reasoning without argument. The forest felt different after sunset. Not threatening, simply alive. Pale blue fungi glowed softly beneath fallen logs. Tiny insects drifted through the air like floating stars. Somewhere high above, unseen birds exchanged quiet calls that echoed gently through the branches. Every few steps, Ethan noticed familiar white root networks crossing beneath the thin layer of soil, connecting one ancient tree to the next. "It is beautiful," Lyra whispered. Ethan nodded. Healthy ecosystems usually are. They reached the stone structure without encountering a single obstacle. Time had rounded its edges, allowing vines and moss to become part of its design. A circular entrance remained partially open beneath layers of flowering plants. Warm air drifted outward, carrying the scent of clean mineral water rather than decay. Ethan removed several vines carefully instead of cutting them. "No unnecessary damage," he said quietly. Lyra noticed the deliberate care in every movement. Inside, the chamber surprised them both. It contained no advanced machinery, no defensive systems, no triasure, only polished stone walls covered with hundreds of engraved symbols surrounding a circular pedestal at the center. A transparent crystal rested upon it, no larger than a human hand. It emitted a gentle silver light synchronized with the slow pulse Ethan had felt beneath the ground since their arrival. As he stepped closer, his portable translator activated automatically. Ancient symbols gradually resolved into readable galactic standard. The first sentence appeared across the small display. "This place remembers every visitor." Lyra inhaled softly. More lines emerged beneath the first. "We were not destroyed by monsters. We were not destroyed by climate. We were destroyed by believing every living thing existed separately." Ethan continued reading while the crystal's faint light reflected across the chamber walls. "We measured strength. We ignored relationships. We studied predators. We never studied balance." The final message appeared after several long seconds. "If you understand this before changing the world, leave peacefully. If you understand it afterward, you're already too late." Neither of them spoke. The silence inside the chamber felt heavier than any warning siren. Ethan slowly looked toward the softly glowing crystal. "They figured it out." Lyra nodded almost imperceptibly. "After making the same mistake we nearly made." Ethan gently reached toward the pedestal, but stopped before touching it. "No," he whispered to himself. "We have already learned enough." At that exact moment, the silver light inside the crystal brightened slightly, then slowly faded until it became almost transparent. No alarm sounded. No hidden doors opened. The ancient structure simply became quiet again, as though acknowledging that its message had finally reached someone willing to read every page instead of stopping after the first. The journey back to Camp Meridian took less than 20 minutes, yet neither Ethan Carter nor Commander Lyra Voss spoke a single word during the walk. The forest no longer felt mysterious. It felt understood, at least enough to inspire humility instead of confidence. Every glowing fungus beneath their boots, every quiet bird hidden among the branches, every root disappearing beneath the soil belonged to something infinitely larger than itself. The ancient builders had not left behind a weapon. They had left behind a lesson. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the camp lights glowed warmly against the darkness. Engineers completed the final cargo inspections while the Meridian prepared its launch sequence. The atmosphere remained remarkably peaceful. The silver shimmer had disappeared from the lake. The blue flowers opened their petals once more beneath the pale moonlight. Even the insects had resumed their gentle chorus. It was as if the entire ecosystem had returned to equilibrium the moment the expedition stopped disturbing it. Dr. Samuel Brooks hurried toward them carrying a portable scanner. "Commander, Mr. Carter, every environmental reading is stabilizing." He hesitated before adding, almost as though the planet decided we are no longer a problem. Ethan smiled gently. "Or perhaps we finally stopped acting like one." Inside the command shelter, the recovered crystal recordings synchronized with the expedition archive. Ancient symbols translated more completely as the linguistic software continued learning their structure. New passages appeared line by line across the central display. Several researchers gathered in respectful silence. The text described no wars, no invasions, and no catastrophic natural disasters. Instead, it documented centuries of careful observation. One passage captured everyone's attention. "We believed intelligence required a brain. We never imagined intelligence could emerge from balance itself." Another followed. "We searched for rulers. We failed because there were only relationships." Commander Lyra slowly lowered her tablet. Every civilization that visited this world expected to negotiate with a leader. Ethan nodded, because that is how civilizations usually work. And this one, he looked toward the quiet valley beyond the shelter window. This one never needed a leader. Another translated entry appeared. The chamber became so quiet that the soft hum of the computers sounded unusually loud. The inscription read, "The greatest mistake made by travelers is believing survival belongs to the strongest individual. Survival belongs to the healthiest connection." Samuel leaned back in his chair with a slow exhale. "That explains everything." Ethan looked toward him. Samuel continued, "The ecosystem never evolved to defeat predators. It evolved to prevent imbalance before predators could become necessary." Several scientists immediately reviewed every observation collected since landing. Suddenly, the entire timeline made sense. The synchronized birds, the silent insects, the shifting pollen, the coordinated routes. Even the drone had not been captured. It had been gently redirected away from increasing disruption. Every response had been proportional. Every adjustment had protected the whole instead of punishing the part. Commander Lyra replayed the forgotten appendix from the century-old survey report beside the newly translated inscription. Both documents reached exactly the same conclusion despite being separated by generations. One had been ignored because it lacked dramatic evidence. The other had remained hidden because nobody searched long enough to find it. Ethan quietly folded his notebook closed. "Sometimes history does not disappear," he said. "It simply waits for someone patient enough to finish reading." A communications officer interrupted the silence. "Commander, Galactic Union Headquarters is requesting our preliminary classification update before departure." Every eye turned toward Lyra. Earlier that morning, the answer would have taken less than 10 seconds. She opened the report template and stared at the blinking cursor. Category: Threat Assessment. Colonization Recommendation. Standard survey procedure suddenly felt painfully inadequate. Finally, she looked toward Ethan. "If you were writing this report, what would you say?" Ethan considered the question for several seconds before answering. "I would tell them this world is neither hostile nor harmless." The room remained silent. It is alive in a way we barely understand. It does not need protecting from us. It needs us to understand why we should protect it. Lyra slowly nodded. Then, without changing a single word, she entered his statement into the official expedition record. Below, she added one final recommendation in her own name: immediate suspension of all civilian settlement proposals pending complete ecological review. Mandatory study of historical survey records before future missions. She paused only once before typing the final sentence. Failure to read previous warnings shall no longer be considered an acceptable operational risk. The report transmitted toward the stars seconds later. Outside, the Meridian's engines awakened with a soft golden glow. As the boarding ramp lowered, Ethan glanced back toward the silent forest one last time. Nothing moved. Yet somehow, the valley no longer felt like a place they were leaving behind. It felt like a teacher watching two students who had finally understood the first lesson. 5 years later, every cadet entering the Galactic Exploration Academy received the same assignment before setting foot on a single survey vessel. They were handed an old expedition report containing only 9 pages. The instructors gave them one simple instruction: read every page. Nobody explained why. The answer waited on the last page, exactly where most people had once stopped paying attention. Commander Lyra Voss stood before a new class of explorers inside the Academy's largest lecture hall. Behind her, a holographic image of the quiet green world rotated slowly above the stage. It looked as peaceful as it had on the day her expedition first arrived. Beautiful forests, clear lakes, endless valleys bathed in golden sunlight. A paradise that still refused to fit inside traditional scientific categories. The old classification system had been rewritten because of that single mission. Worlds were no longer judged only by gravity, climate, predators, or atmosphere. A completely new chapter had been added to every exploration manual: ecological network intelligence assessment. The change seemed small on paper. In reality, it transformed how civilizations approached every unknown ecosystem they encountered. Young cadets often asked the same question: was that planet dangerous? Lyra always answered with the same quiet smile. Only to those who believed nature existed in separate pieces. The lecture hall remained silent every time she said those words. Across the Academy campus, Ethan Carter never accepted the title of hero that reporters continued trying to give him. He returned to teaching field survival exactly as he had before the expedition. His classroom contained no expensive decorations. No medals covered the walls. Instead, shelves overflowed with rocks, leaves, weather journals, old boots, broken compasses, and handwritten notebooks filled with observations collected throughout his career. Every lesson began the same way. He placed 2 photographs on the table. One showed a roaring predator. The other showed a quiet forest. Then he asked, "Which one should worry you more?" Nearly every new student pointed toward the predator. Ethan simply nodded before beginning another lesson. By the end of the semester, almost everyone changed their answer. Months after the expedition, a remote observation satellite continued studying the remarkable world from high orbit without disturbing its surface. Researchers noticed something fascinating. The ecosystem behaved exactly as it always had. Forests adapted to changing seasons. Rivers shifted naturally. Wildlife migrated peacefully. The immense biological network required no visitors to exist. Humanity had not discovered its purpose. They had only discovered their own misunderstanding. One afternoon, Samuel Brooks visited Ethan's office carrying a newly published scientific journal. The headline stretched across the front page: "Cooperative intelligence without central control confirmed across multiple worlds." Samuel laughed quietly as he placed the journal on the desk. "You realize this is becoming an entirely new branch of science." Ethan looked through the window where autumn leaves drifted across the Academy courtyard. "Good," he answered. "Science should become larger every time we realize we were asking the wrong question." Samuel smiled. "Do you ever think about going back?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he slowly shook his head. Some places teach you everything they wanted you to learn the first time. Years later, another exploration vessel approached that distant green world. This time, the crew never landed immediately. They remained in orbit for 3 full weeks, quietly observing weather patterns, wildlife behavior, route communication signals, and ancient records before making a single decision. At the end of the observation period, the captain transmitted one brief message to Galactic Union headquarters. No landing requested. Observation complete. Ecosystem stable. Respectfully maintaining distance. No one criticized the decision. In fact, the report received the highest commendation available for scientific judgment. Far below, the forests continued breathing beneath the morning sun. Silver birds crossed the sky in graceful formations. Blue flowers opened with the first warmth of daylight. White roots carried silent conversations beneath the soil exactly as they had for countless generations. The world neither celebrated the visitors nor feared them. It simply continued living in perfect balance. Somewhere inside the Academy archives, the old forgotten appendix remained preserved beside the official expedition report that followed it. Students still noticed the difference between them. The first warning had been ignored because almost nobody finished reading it. The second changed the future because someone finally did. Ethan often remembered the sentence he had spoken on the day everything began. The most dangerous worlds are never the ones that roar. Looking back, he realized the lesson had never truly been about one distant planet. It had always been about humanity itself. The greatest strength of the human race was never superior technology, unmatched endurance, or fearless exploration. It was the willingness to question certainty, to read one more page when everyone else had already closed the book, and to discover that wisdom sometimes waits quietly where almost nobody thinks to look. And perhaps that was why the stars kept welcoming humanity, not because humans always had the right answers, but because they never stopped asking better questions.